Welcome to Canon Fodder, episode 8. My guest this week is the Outgoing Misanthrope. We're going to be referring to him as Tom. And this week we're discussing Starship Troopers, a book that we both love. How are you doing, Tom?
I am doing just fine. So happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. And I remember, so I put out a list of books that I'd read to various group chats. And you were one of the first people to jump on Starship Troopers. Another person was like, "Hey, can I do Starship Troopers?" And I'm like, "Oh, Tom already claimed it with gusto, I might add."
I will embarrass myself and say that I posted without spaces. I volunteer as tribute. So I used a terrible sci-fi dystopian story to reference how much I love this technical sci-fi dystopian story. And I know it's not an actual dystopia. It's as close as we get to utopia as men. But it's kind of funny and embarrassing. But I just keep my humility out in front of me.
Well, all right, let's start there because we should definitely get into the book as quickly as possible. You say sci-fi utopia, and I want you to expand on that because I don't necessarily disagree, but I want to know your thoughts.
Yeah, so I use the term perfect a lot when I describe the things I like. And then to defend that, when you say something's perfect, when you call your woman perfect, when you call a sunset perfect, is it the idea that there's nothing wrong with it? Or is it that the good and bad things are in perfect alignment? And that's kind of where I feel when I say perfect, I mean that it is as good as it could possibly be. And you can't add anything to make it better. And if you take anything away from it, it's not what it was. And that's kind of a working definition. It'll probably change, but it's that delicate balance of just right and not good enough. That's what makes like perfection for me in terms of like person that I love or something like that. It's the balance of both things. And I feel that Heinlein put together a world that is almost like fabricated to get at just white American males that have any kind of military inclination. And it's bigger than that. But in terms of that group, this story it's like crack. Once you get into it, there's just no way to not like some part of it. I like all of it, but there's always, even guys that don't like the whole book, there's something about the book that they love.
So one thing, Heinlein, he doesn't beat you over the head with this. I almost said that, but he tries to mathematically prove that his society is best. And that's a big aspect of the book, especially later when Johnny is in officer candidate school. He's challenged by his professors to scientifically prove through symbolic logic his answers. So the humanities, in Heinlein's estimation, can be proven correct or incorrect through the use of cold calculating logic. But then at the same time, he kind of undercuts himself and he's like, well, the reason that the reason that we have this society and that it keeps working is because it hasn't failed yet.
Exactly.
And
that's chapter 12, my favorite chapter.
And that's kind of, for all of his waxing philosophical about why his society is best, he just points out, well, it's the best because it hasn't failed yet. And there's this meeting of, it's kind of like an analogy for officers in general, right? Like, you can have all the theory you want, but as soon as you land in a combat zone, that's when you really learn what war is all about. So a society, therefore, is perfect until it falls apart, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
I think it does. And I think that's what he was kind of trying to portray by being not hypocritical, oxymoronic, by having the teacher. And I love that section. That's a class I would love to be in, where the teacher challenges you, you answer a question, and it's like, okay, tomorrow you have to turn in a thesis paper, arguing technically the point you just made. And I think that's awesome. And I think Heinlein's really having a conversation with himself, and it like really shows, but not in an ugly way or even a peek behind the curtain. It's a genuine discussion from page 1 to the final page about the concept of society, of a militaristic society. And that's something I wanted to dig into, is the where's my notes here of the dichotomy between who these authors were in the sci-fi golden age, which I do put Heinlein in there, and I do consider that period between approximately like 47 to 80s pretty generous, maybe like 75. But that window of time, in my opinion, is the sci-fi golden age, and it's when some of the best work came out. Heinlein was not based in heckin' red-pilled, not at all. He was libertarian, but he definitely did some things in his personal life. He lived a way that we now would esteem. If we had a colleague or someone we knew that lived the same way, we would respect their art, their writing, but we would not associate morally or principally with them. Yet he wrote this book that is, it's fascinating how much it maps, in my opinion, it maps to the world we could potentially enter, depending on how things go. And I know that's a pretty white pill perspective, but he draws out this roadmap. It's so fascinating too, how he doesn't predict anything, but it's so believable. Everything about, in my opinion, everything about how he sees society could go, I find it eminently believable from that mid 20th century American male perspective. He has yet to see the social fabric unwind in the 1960s and 70s. He has yet to experience what happens in the 80s with the loss of faith, and then in the 90s with the loss of the great adversary. You know, all of this came apart, but he wrote this at a time where the sky was the limit, and it was so obvious that the liberal world order, if it was held in the hands of the veterans and the intelligent men of society, it was going to go to the stars. And I still find it believable, even though I know we've fallen very far from where we were when he wrote this book.
Well, and it's funny too, because they talk about, or he talks about in passing in the moral and moral philosophy and history class, right? That society fell apart due to the revolt of the scientists, right? Which I would describe our current moment as sort of as the revolt of the scientists, right? And also talking about roves of teenagers just being delinquents in the streets and causing all sorts of crime, until a group of veterans decided that enough had been enough, right? And
Yeah.
they form a new society as a reaction to the utter degeneracy and chaos around them. And that's why also critics of the book call this a fascistic novel, which I think is stupid. It's a militaristic novel for sure, but that's like calling, that's like calling World War I Germany or the Prussian nation fascistic. Like, it doesn't fit into that definition whatsoever, no matter what limp-wristed liberals have to say about it.
I'd push back there on only one aspect, and I get so much guff for this from so many people, but I've really fallen in love with the concept that fascism is whatever successfully opposes communism. And like, I know that's a funny way to portray it, because there's real fascism, which came out of Italy, which was communists that saw they didn't want to be Marxists, and the Germans had already taken up the National Socialist thing. So they're like, how can we differentiate ourselves? Oh, we'll do the third rail. Not an advocate of that whatsoever. We see that it doesn't work. But the idea of calling things fascist, that the memeplex, the woke are more correct than the mainstream.
Right.
Yeah, so them calling this fascistic, it's correct in that sense, because you absolutely, within a few chapters, you can see that this does work. This system can work. Like, things have to be in a certain order. There are certain elements of society that have to be suppressed, others that have to be elevated, and multiple generations of discipline have to be kind of incorporated. But if that had happened, I find it totally believable that you could have this system where the franchise is only extended to retired military, and the military is this incredibly small compared to the population, but incredibly large in gross total numbers. So you have plenty of voters. There's that one section in the book where Terra is 3% citizens to civilians, but then Iskander, which is a colony at another planet, is 75% citizen to civilian. And we honestly should have started. I can't imagine anyone in current year that hasn't read this book, but just in case they haven't, it's set in a not too far flung future where there is the Terran Federation centered on the planet Terra, or Earth. There is Cherenkov drives, which is light speed travel, probably the weakest point in the whole book, but that's something no one's figured out how to get right in sci-fi. They are a society that is currently at war with what they refer to as the Bugs. The Bugs are an arachnid type race from a faraway planet called Klendathu. And then there are other types of aliens out there, and the ones that they get into are the Skinnies, which are 7 to 8 foot tall, vaguely humanoid. And then the implication is that it's the full universe model, that there are alien species everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the setting for the book where it starts, and it's this very large war. It's an interstellar war. And that's how we follow the protagonist, Johnny Rico, drops us into the middle of a battle in the first chapter. And then it kind of walks us back through his time at the end of high school, into boot camp, into being enlisted, becoming an officer, and then finally where the book ends. So I think that's a good encapsulated summary. And, on the one hand, it's very much golden age sci-fi in that they clearly don't understand the scope of how the immense challenge that is space travel that we've now learned. But on the other hand, it's very grounded and realistic, so much more than a lot of the post-Marxian sci-fi that you see now, where I love the show The Expanse, but visually it's just so silly that these semi-literate, gutter trash would somehow be space technicians operating, space stations. It's just not believable. It's not believable that 90 IQ malcontents can keep a space colony going. Whereas Heinlein's world, it's perfectly believable with how brutal and regimented the society is, that of course they have a interstellar empire. Of course they're fighting giant spiders. But I know I went off on a tangent there. In terms of the believability, though, I do think he nailed it. I think he did skate that line between fantasy and kind of a future history.
Well, so you talk about the golden age of sci-fi, and I definitely agree with you in terms of this book being part of that, and also the timeline that you gave for the golden age of science fiction. And when you talk about how he kind of skates over the challenges of space travel, that's definitely true. But there's something, I don't know, there's something refreshing about that to me. I've read Andy Weir's The Martian, right? And yes, that was a fine book, but just getting, I guess the whole point is that it's a hard sci-fi kind of exploration into how a man might be able to survive stranded on a distant planet. But there's something nice about this kind of being in the middle of, let's say Star Wars and space opera are on the one hand, and hard science fiction is on the other, right? This and most golden age science fiction, I'd say, kind of lives in this valley where let the nerds worry about the math and stuff. We just want to have fun, but without being so oh, let's break all the rules of physics because we have this really cool idea we want to get across. It's just grounded enough that you can enjoy it while still having something to think about and something that you can try and build in real life.
That's perfectly stated. It's just grounded enough. And I think that's the earmark of the entire, that's what makes it the golden age, is that even the tech that they get wrong, even the unbelievable stuff that we now see, we still look at it and it's still going to, in the same way that Star Trek has kind of guided the last 30 years of actual technical advancement, at least mimetically. Apparently all the white hat hackers love Star Trek. I'm not just cards on the table. Star Trek is a fine thing that I don't know much about. I know enough to make jokes on the internet, but I have never really watched a lot of it. So it's never, impacted me the way that the movie, and this was going to come up, I hope you're okay with talking
Oh,
about the
totally.
movie too. The movie changed my life. I'm
Really?
not gonna age dox completely, but I was an elementary school student that was not allowed to watch it, and I
Ooh.
found a way to watch it, and it terrified me, and it was the coolest and scariest thing. I will never forget watching it for the first time, where I was, what I was doing. It was a seminal moment in my life to watch this movie, because this was a couple years after it came out, and my parents were like, hard no, you will never watch this movie. And then the moment I got out from under him, it was one of my coups as a young intelligence operative of convincing my friends this was a good idea, and getting there, convince my friend's dad to then get the movie to then let us watch it, and we did. And I was hiding behind the couch the whole time because it was just the scariest thing. Like, the visuals were terrifying for me as a kid. I didn't watch a lot of movies and see a lot of gore as a kid,
Right.
but nonetheless, the news interludes, the uniforms, the prettiness of the women, which, like, looking back now, pretty is whatever you want it to be, but as a young man, it was just the communal shower scene, and I'm not even trying to be like sophomoric about it. It was so mind-blowing to see a world of integration to that level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because a lot of people see the movie and then they read the book and they do not get what happened, because it's completely different stories, like almost unrecognizably different.
Right.
I personally believe the movie's amazing, whether it's intentionally good or he tried to do satire and he didn't realize, how great it was. I think the movie is about as good as it could be. I would love to remake the movie one day. That's a dream I have. It'll probably never happen.
And we can talk about Paul Verhoeven, because RoboCop is one of my favorite movies. Right.
Excellent movie.
I love Starship Troopers. I loved it when I was a kid, much like yourself. I didn't the social satire, right, went over my head completely as a kid. I watched it again as a young man, and I was like, oh, so this is a spoof. This is a big joke, right? And and even when Sargon of Akkad did his breakdown of both the book and the movie, and he's like, well, this is actually like a hyper liberal society, right? And like I ate that up because at the time I was a classical liberal, right? I kind of don't have a political label these days because I just,
many reasons.
It's just honest. Honestly, it's boring to me. But I can watch Starship Troopers, the film, and I can reread the book, because I reread the book for this. And I could just slip back into re-enlisting. I can remember my 18-year-old self enlisting in the Army and thinking that I was about to go on this grand adventure, which, I mean, it kind of was, but not to that extent. I remember being in basic training and living a regimented lifestyle and thinking, okay, this is who I am for the rest of my life. And it was pretty disappointing when I got to, big Army, and it was not this well-oiled machine of discipline. I was kind of craving the Starship Troopers experience of rigid discipline that just the modern American military, and maybe no military has ever had that, because this is idealized, but it was a disappointment that you could be a piece of crap, and you can get away with it, and I certainly did.
So that's
here and there.
That's a note that I had, and I'm heavily military identified in terms of my family and culture and the things that I do now and the people I associate with. And growing up, I only had one goal, which was to be a Navy SEAL. And I know everyone knows the Navy SEALs now, but when I was a kid, they were this really niche kind of military thing that not a lot of people talked about, and it was mostly like negative. And I remember the time, or the Life magazine spread of the SEALs inductees having their goggles pulled down over their face, hands tied behind their back, feet tied together, and then they have to stay in 10 feet of water, and they have to just keep bouncing up. And that's literal torture. But to the younger version of me, there was nothing cooler in my eyes than that challenge. And as someone who never did get in, it didn't line up right. When I wanted to go, I had other stuff going. When I didn't want to go, I didn't go down the path. Whatever it was, this is a note that I left, is that every time I finish this book, I tell myself I'm never going to read it again because I'm overwhelmingly motivated to abandon my entire life and join the French Foreign Legion. And if it had not been for my political awareness, the last time I read this book, before this time, so the last time I read this book was in 2021, and the job I was working, the things I was doing, the way life was, I had the opportunity. And if I had not been politically where I was, I would have gone. I would have just done whatever it takes, because this book does that to you. It literally, it does it. And it's so sad to hear what you're saying, but it's also an affirmation. And whatever we feel, God puts us where we are. The question is, what do we do with it? And you can't spend your whole life being like, oh, if only I'd done this or been that, then things would be X, Y, or Z. You might be right, but it doesn't do anything for you, because you can't go back.
Right.
And he puts us where we belong, and then it's up to us to make it work. But being a father now, I'm so sad that what you say is true. And I do know it's true, not just from what you say, but from my own exploration, in that the big green mean machine is not even what it was in Vietnam. It's not even what it was in Korea. And those are historically low points, considered to be low points in the American military tradition. And where it is at now, it's so not what you get in Starship Troopers. And I genuinely hope it gets back to that place. But this book is, what did I say? It's one part, it's in a dichotomy between cautionary tale and recruitment brochure. And it's an amazing recruitment brochure for certain types of people. And I think you and I have a wavelength match here. But I wanted to read this quote. This is from chapter 2, and it's kind of a preamble. I'm fairly convinced that any English-speaking Christian-identified male, so long as he is biologically grown up, can read this section of the book and immediately and thoroughly deduce not only what kind of man he is and can be, but how he would fare in the world that Starship Troopers and countless other novels portray about mankind dominating the worlds. And the scene is when Johnny Rico is talking to the inducting officer, and he's just taken the oath. And he's just found out he's got 48 hours of leave before he actually, he's signed on the dotted line. He's taken the oath. He's amped himself up like, this is happening. And then the guy's like, well, no, actually 48 hours. And he grins coldly and says, do you know what happens if you don't come back? And Johnny Rico says, court-martial? He says, not a thing, not a blessed thing, except that your papers get marked, term not completed satisfactorily. And you never, never, never get a second chance. This is our cooling off period, in which we shake off the overgrown babies who didn't really mean it and should never have taken the oath. It saves the government money, and it saves a power of grief for kids and their parents. The neighbors needn't guess. You don't even have to tell your parents. To me, that was such a indictment on the I'm sorry if this isn't PG or not, but the shit lib that I was.
Mm-hmm.
The pothead, the government man, and I vacillated so often in my life between extremes. But who I was in my early 20s, pretending I didn't want the crew cut, pretending I didn't want that rigid structure of life, and then you read this book, and this is the kind of book that you shave your head, start doing push-ups, and run to the recruiter no matter how far away it is.
Oh,
it is that powerful.
Like in those recruiting commercials. Yeah.
They try. Those 3 decades of recruiting propaganda has tried and spent billions of dollars, and they've not even come close to 1% of what Heinlein did.
And now you have my 2 lesbian moms, and I'm fighting for them and their right to I'm going to keep it PG, so I'm just not going to finish that sentence. But
I'm glad you brought that up, though. Have you seen, and I know this is a little topical, so we can just shut it down if we shouldn't do anything topical, but the Institute for the Study of War just put out a 2-part series on why Russia cannot win in Ukraine. And you can think what you want about either side. I'm not here to debate that, but they layered in this dystopian future of America if we do not like it's hilarious to me to see these neoliberals saying the same lines that were said, and I remember it clearly back in 2001 and 2002. If we don't fight them over there, we're going to fight them
We're gonna
over
fight
here.
them over here. That's right.
Right. And I'm wondering, because if they're listening, you know, I'm sure you have a personal NSA guy and I've got a personal, you know, ICE guy, and we've all got our own personal little person monitoring everything we do.
Wait. You're gonna get deported if
No, I was making a silly inside joke. It doesn't even matter.
all right.
The point is I should have said HSI. It was a brain fart on my part. But they are going to find this book. Like the capacity for thought crime and the lack thereof is why they're so bad at memeing and they're so bad at the propaganda game. But they're going to get bad enough that they're going to start taking in people who can actually play the game. And I would not be surprised if in the next 6 to 8 months we get a Starship Troopers flavored ad campaign. Because if they captured my family and held them hostage and made me work for the GAE and I had to deliver, that's the route I would take. Like that and a few other movies, I wouldn't be fooling around with any of the stuff they're doing now. I would be showing Space Marines. I'd be showing 40K. I'd be showing those are the images I would use to capture the hearts of sensitive young men and to get them to put on the uniform. And the fact that they haven't just shows you how incompetent that they are.
Right. And there's a certain flavor, especially in the 2010s, of like this. It's like this mid-war malaise, right? And this has nothing to do with Starship Troopers, and that's fine because I want to go all over the place because you bring up some really interesting points. But like I'm thinking about Lone Survivor, Zero Dark 30. There was that Navy SEAL movie, the one with like actual Navy SEAls in it.
Oh, Act of Valor. Yeah.
Act of Valor. Right.
Yep.
So it's like just these threading the needle of these wars. Like these wars suck, but the soldiers are great. Right. And
yes.
we don't even like trying to preempt the post-Vietnam malaise. Right. Trying to like people are so afraid of another Vietnam, right? Whether it's politically, whether it's the way that veterans were treated after the Vietnam War, whether it's guys coming home getting spit on by hippies, whether or not that happened, that's part of the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah.
Like that's part of the Vietnam memory, and our society is trying so hard not to do that we're not going to get actually like great film. We're not going to get a Deer Hunter. We're not going to get Apocalypse Now. We're going to get Mark Wahlberg falling down a mountain for 2 hours.
and it's that's Peter Berg, the director of Lone Survivor. He also did The Kingdom, which is that one with I don't care about the actors,
but
they're
Matt Damon.
No, that's Green Zone. I'm as a Jody, I'm very familiar with war film. So
I mean, I love war films. Like, and I was rear echelon. So
I love war film too. I have a history of doing film stuff. I would like to get into war film one day, and I'd like to prove you wrong in terms of what we can do. You're right about that late '80s period. They couldn't make a good war film, but the point I wanted to make with Peter Berg and with what's her face? I normally know it. The one who did not Lone Survivor, Zero Dark 30. When you look at
Catherine Bigelow.
That's right. Okay, so just a little bit behind the curtain of filmmaking. It's a little different now because so many countries have UH-60s, but for a long time, the only country that had UH-60s painted in military colors were the United States, Canada, and I think it was England, but I think they actually have their own. I think there's one other country, and none of them allowed you to film with them unless DOD signed off on it. And that's one thing I think a lot of people don't realize is any war movie you see, the exception now is that the UAE has military equipment, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. If you can convince those governments to let you use it, you can use it, but that's a lot of money. And there was a movie that just came out of, it wasn't Qatar, I think it was a UAE. It's called The Ambush. It's to American military
with the sniper.
Yeah, to American military taste, it's a very milquetoast war movie. But when you look at that country, it's a big deal for them. And it's the biggest movie they've ever made. Everyone loved it. And it's kind of fascinating when you look into it because war movies, even when they're complete lies, like Lone Survivor, and I'm not impugning anybody's honor, But that movie is not what happened.
No.
Anyone who knows anything about the military knows that, and anyone involved with Operation Red Wings or whatever, they're probably under NDA. But that movie paints it in
I
a
read the
very,
book.
and I don't even know, I haven't, so I don't know where that is. But that movie itself, you nailed it. They were so desperate to avoid Vietnam, and when you look at that operation, they turn it into this heroic story. And it is such a devastating and pointless waste of resources. In the most cold calculation, let's deny the humanity of the soldiers and just look at them as operators.
Mm-hmm.
They lost a platoon of SEALs to a well-placed rocket.
I mean, I think that was like the deadliest day in the history of the Navy SEALs. Like they
It's
even
either
talk
that or
about
Anaconda. Yeah, I don't.
yeah,
But there's a lot of them.
both.
That's the sad part, though, is that Afghanistan represents a massive waste of resources when you look at,
even beyond human capital, right?
Oh yeah,
and I think and to bring it back to Starship Troopers for 1 second, right? Because there is no waste of human capital. One, if you sign up for government service, right? Even if you are mentally challenged, they will find something for you to do, right?
the MI does not waste. Yep.
And it's not even MI, right? They will find, because it's not just, it's service in any aspect of society. It's not just the military, right? Which is I mean, obviously Heinlein doesn't go into those aspects as much because this is a military book, but there's something about this society where it's like, no, we are going to, if you volunteer and you want to try to become a citizen, we are going to give you every opportunity to do so, right? No matter what, right? And even when he's going through officer school, right, Rico is concerned that he's going to be placed in a different unit, but he's like, but I'm a roughneck. This is my home. This is my unit. These are my guys, right? And the officer's like, listen, if you died right now, you would die a roughneck. There's so much that I yearn for that Heinlein really scratches in Troopers, right? That just we're not, you don't see today. It's just so vastly different, the experience. Like one, I think, modern military, I think it's like you're in one unit for like 2 years tops. And it's very intentional, by the way. They switch out everybody on a rotation all the time to make sure that you are not loyal to any one commander or any one officer or any one sergeant, right?
Right. And that's intentional. That's very intentional.
Totally intentional, because they want you to be, they actually, I don't think they want loyalty, which is really messed up.
No, they want addiction. They want you to be addicted to it. To the TRICARE, to the fact that your knees don't work, the fact that you need 7 different medications to feel normal. That's a feature, not a bug. People always talk about it the way the vets come home broken, and they act like, how could this happen? It's like, that's the plan. You don't want to empower a bunch of traditionally minded, Christian identified, evil white males with camaraderie, loyalty, and skill, not without putting some real deeply planted exploit that you don't have to worry about it. Because, and the book nails it. I mean, if the veterans come home angry, you are in trouble, because they know how to coordinate, and you've given them the ability to kill coldly. And I'm starting to speak about things I only understand academically, and I acknowledge that I'm not a military guy. But when you look at the history of warfare, there are a few things that are quite so devastating as a group of young men who will die for each other, who have overlapping skill sets and a good leader. Like there's a lot you can do with that. And I think, as much as the regime is bad at most of what they do, they are still very good at atomizing their own military, whether they're introducing people who should not be in. And you and I both know there are plenty of people in there that shouldn't be, or at least not in uniform. They should be wearing a cook's uniform, not fatigues. And I do think, I know we've gone far afield here, but it is intentional. They don't want what is in Starship Troopers. They don't want what is in The White Company. They don't want what's any of these classic military stories because it's such a threat to their limp-wristed managerial power.
It's very. This is how. Oh geez, what's the foxes? Yeah, this is how foxes
Yep.
lead an army, right? Rather than lions.
I'm gonna commit the cardinal sin of jackasses and quote myself, but it was a great formulation. It was one of those rare times that I actually I think I nailed it in terms of it's the end of a piece. I just I'm so silly here. I gotta open it, but it's about that fox dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I heard that, for someone who's been steeped in the literature for so long, it's so funny how Aaron McIntyre has introduced me to so much more nuance in terms of the literature, and
Right.
cannot recommend him enough. But he gets into it. And I had not been a Gaetano. I had not read
Mosca.
Mosca. I hadn't read a lot of Mosca, and a lot of the other ones too that I should have. But I'd read a lot of Moldbug Yarvin, who very blatantly ripped off a lot of that stuff, and I'm glad he did. He did a great job with it. But from my perspective, it was like Yarvin said those things, and so then finding them in a much older and purer form has been awesome. But the fox and lion dichotomy, I think it's actually trichotomy, and maybe I'm stepping too big for my britches here, but I believe that the foxes are the priests and the lions are the warriors, but we need a third leg to that stool, and it's the merchants. And I picked the pig, and I think that's funny because commies will like that. But I'm not saying pig in the not
In the
necessarily
Orwellian
negative.
sense.
No, it is a little bit, but this is a long story. This will make all of this is going to sound silly now, but one day in the near future, it'll make a lot more sense. But the pig, in terms of how a farmer knows a pig, they are incredibly smart. They are brutal. They are mischievous. They are lazy. They are cunning. They are adorable in certain contexts. They are incredibly useful and helpful. And they will destroy your children just as quickly as they will. And I mean that literally. Pigs will kill kids just as quickly as they will transform a 2-acre plot of unusable land into the best farmland you could have. So I think it works really well. So what I put at the end of the piece is that this is always the goal because no fox long tolerates control by lions. Once the state of war is suspended, the priests and merchants chafe under the dominance of warriors, and democracy is the perfect Trojan horse for toppling the rulership of lions. So that's just one little segment of it, but you nail it with the term of how the foxes keep the lions under control, because nothing in the biology or in the metaphysics of it indicate that the foxes can control the lions. And yet you and I both know in our entire lives, we've never seen the lions in charge. They you don't get to be a lion in charge.
And so one of the things that I kind of do, one of the ideas that I've been playing with in my own work, and I'm recalcitrant to talk about my own work, but I wonder if sort of lion traits have been kind of bred out of us.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah, no, it's a completely scary thought because, but I think I had that thought once, and I think it's wrong. To be fair, I think I was wrong there, but I had to just voice it anyway because I like to scare my audience.
Well, I do think they've tried. They haven't succeeded completely, but if you interact with the military in current year, and I'm not talking about enlisted. Enlisted is a whole other bag of walruses. But if you talk to officers, it is staggering to see, especially if you know, like I had the good fortune to have spent a lot of time with a number of veterans from World War II, with Korea, not as many with Vietnam. But then in that kind of saddle period between the 70s and the 90s, just a luck, like turn of fate. And I got to spend time with officers too, not just enlisted. And when you look at the quality of men that they were, and who and what they were, and I'm not even talking about the like million times decorated hero soldiers, just the run of the mill Marine Corps officer from the 1950s and 60s. That is a type of person that where they exist, they are not in that uniform. They're probably working, in a nuclear plant, or they're probably working in aerospace, or they're working somewhere else. And there's far fewer of them. So they do exist, but I do think the system has really tried to get that out of their pool. They don't want those guys.
I mean, I think that's the promise of the liberal project, is that because we saw a century, give or take, at least a half century, but probably 100 years, and we can even go back further, but we've seen, okay, so from Napoleon to, let's say, I don't even, the death of Stalin, right? Just as a rough point, we saw the impact of, let's call it, lion leadership. Though I'm not trying to like venerate Stalin or anything like that, but he was definitely of a type, right?
I was literally just going to try to interrupt and ask you, Stalin, lion or fox?
Jeez,
It's a tricky question, right?
Yeah, no, that's a really. I mean, like, I would say Fox, just because of the way that he dealt with internal problems.
He was also a bank robber that turned into a editor and publisher that turned into the guy whose job it was to coordinate meetings for what would become the Politburo. That was his path to power.
Yeah, he's like, he's the ultimate bureaucrat in a lot
Yeah,
of ways.
he kept the schedule, but he had to become a lion to have the purges in the 1930s so that he wasn't pushed out the same way he pushed everyone else out.
Yeah, so maybe he's even just a chameleon, to keep the animal analogy going.
I didn't mean to derail you. I just stopped.
No, that's
fascinating.
Fascinating is the right word. But we, especially in the First and Second World Wars, we saw destruction unlike anything we've ever seen before, right? And I think the problem with the, and even Civil War, right? So let's keep it in the American context, right? The answer to American wars seems to be, okay, if we atomize people so much that they will not rise up and try and fight for things, right? Even like we'll take away their religion, we'll take away their ethnos, we'll take away the value of citizenship, right? And we'll keep promising them bread and circuses ad infinitum, right? We will breed out lion qualities, right? And I think we're seeing right now the chickens are coming home to roost.
Very quickly with the program. It's not like they've been doing it for that, like they haven't been doing it well for that long. I would say since the 1970s is when it's been really cranking to like suppress the lion.
Well, I mean, I'd say that this is the entire project of the post-Civil War, and I'm gonna stop using animal analogies right now because I've definitely mixed up my metaphors.
No, you're fine, and it's a theme that I write on in a lot of the stuff that I will one day be releasing. So it's totally fine. I fall into that mode very quickly.
I'm not John Parse. I'm not gonna start talking about sheep. And
Parse is a great man.
No, I know. I love Parse.
He and I are in literally wavelength matched in how we see the world. So I use the animals because that's the way my midwit brain can understand it. Because I'm bad at people, but I'm good at animals. But I do think the liberal project, I love hearing you say that because so many people of our stripe and on our side, for lack of a better term, they're like, if we can just get back to Reaganomics, if we can just get back to good old Eisenhower. And it's like the rot is so much deeper than that. And even if you could roll back to perfect Reagan, the seeds of the destruction we are reaping, those were sown long before the 1980s. And I do think it goes all the way at least to Abraham Lincoln. And just so many things that have been swept under the rug or been portrayed as good things that were terrible things in terms of displacing the aristocracy, putting warriors a step beneath bureaucrats. What a terrible mistake that was.
Oh, I mean, I think the thinking of the post-war Department of Defense, right, which is like such a misnomer, by the way. It should never have been not called, like, it should still be called the War Department.
Absolutely.
You know, like it just it's such a language game. But the idea of putting a civilian in charge, because, and you can, this even goes back to Tocqueville, right? When he's
Mm.
talking about democracy in America. I think it's like towards the end of his book, he's like, the army is always going to be looking for an enemy to fight. So the idea then in America is, okay, well, if we put a civilian in charge of the army, it's going to rein in that tendency to, like, it's like, if the army is a hammer always looking for a nail, then the Secretary of Defense is a carpenter who keeps it in its place until it's ready to hammer a nail, right?
Yeah.
But here we're seeing that the carpenter is drunk and he sees how awesome his hammer is, so he's just going to hammer everything. Again,
Literally,
really,
the problem.
really terrible metaphors.
No,
But,
it's actually it's perfect though, because it's, yes, the hammer is always looking for nails. Like that wasn't a problem. You want an army that's constantly looking for an enemy. Does that mean that you turn people into enemies? No. And so that's with the liberal project. I think you nailed it with the language game, and they've really, this is where public school, and this is a conspiracy theory of mine, but public school was necessary to get everybody within the thrall of the bureaucrat. If schooling was left up to families and communities and churches, and even just at the state level, you'd have so many more people who would think orthogonally to the program, capital T, capital P.
I mean,
But
that's
because
not even a conspiracy. That's just, it's based on the Prussian model.
and it works for what they're doing. But you see how these people, when they tried to rip God away from the human existence and pretend that this materialist approach to life, and we are going to circle back to Starship Troopers, because Heinlein does that. He's guilty of this. As much as I love the book, as much as I love the work, he's one of the people we are talking about. But this idea that you could, I put it somewhere in here. Heinlein creates a near perfect picture of what the liberal white man thought a technologically driven future would look like when all the races and cultures had caught up to where they were. It's a world of linguistic diversity, religious diversity, technological stability in an advanced state, with none of the trappings of tribalism and what we now understand to be operationalized Marxism or progressive dysgenics. And I know that's the NRX analysis creeping in at the end, but I do think Heinlein was part of that group that thought, if everybody could just think like an American, then we could do so much more. And I'm not even saying they're wrong, but he was duped. He was duped into believing that the bureaucratic and the academic path was the way you get there.
And there's even it's either actually I forget what movie it's from. It's from a Vietnam movie. I think it might be not Apocalypse Now, but Full Metal Jacket. But he's like, inside every gook is an American just waiting to crawl out.
That's got to be that. I know the line. I cannot remember the actor that delivers it.
That's got it. Well, no, it's not. It's one of the officers. No, it's one of the officers, I think, that, like, he's talking to when he gets in country.
Yeah. That's a hilarious
line
it's
such
for
a good
line.
Readings. oh, most definitely, because it's definitely this. It's the fatal flaw of post-war America, because they came out of World War II. They were fighting the Cold War. They were about to go to the moon, right? They were about to hit, like, the zenith of all human experience in terms of achievement, in terms of science and technology, right? And it was this hubris that there was no other mode of being, right? And we still have this, like, the people will see the state of America right now and still claim that we are the greatest country on earth
with no sense of irony. Yep.
Yeah.
They just believe it. And the weirdest people too. The people that, like, will shit on America constantly, and then in the next breath they're like, "Love it or leave it." Like, it's fascinating.
Yeah. So to get back to Starship Troopers, because that was a heck of a divergence, but I'm really glad that we did it, because it's interesting, and I think people will find it interesting. My dictum is, if I find it interesting, somebody else has to find it interesting out there.
Right? At least, right? And then we can square that too, because I'm fascinated with the topic, and I think that that's a credit to the book itself, because it does, I'd actually like to hear, so rarely do I ever want to hear from liberals or progressives, but I would actually like to hear, if you can find an honest liberal to read this book and then give their thoughts on it. And I'll go ahead and put myself in the bigotry corner. I want to hear a straight white male liberal read this book and then give an assessment of it, but in private. So they're not doing any of the performance or the theatrics. They're not worried about, like, staying on script. Even if we had to, rough them up a bit, tie them to a chair or shine a light in their face and say, tell us what you thought about this book. Like, what I mean?
Give me a book report, Destiny. Tell me what you thought of.
We could meme that into reality. I think. I don't know much about the Destiny guy, but I know I think he's in kind of a low place right now. I think he's dealing with some stuff. So maybe now's
Destiny,
the time.
Service will guarantee citizenship. Come on, buddy.
But I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear them. I'd love to hear the pathetic attempt to portray the obvious amazingness of that future world in a negative way.
And I will push back on it real quick, right? Because the society isn't perfect. Because like what we were talking about before, that the army is always going to be looking for a new enemy. And I wonder what the society would look like post bug war. Like let's say they reach their, because I mean, to take it to a historical place, right? As soon as the Spartans win the Peloponnesian War, they fall into decadence.
Yes.
So this society is an engine running, like it's just this engine that's running to an end that is achievable, right? Because I mean, at the end of the book, there's at least optimism that humanity is going to win this war. It's not as bleak as the movie, right? Where the movie is, the bugs are given more due, right? This the humans are so advanced in the book that victory almost seems like a foregone conclusion. Yes, they lose Buenos Aires, but there's never a sense like in Halo, you have you as the Master Chief. Yeah, it's very obvious, especially in the first two games, that humanity could lose the war. In the Starship Troopers film, you have Neil Patrick Harris's character talking about how this is a species level threat. Right. There are a few. Battlestar Galactica is a race for the survival of humanity, and there's all these different types of, science fiction is littered with these kind of doomer perspectives, which I think a lot of them can be cringe, but there are a lot of diamonds in the rough.
When they're good, they're great. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
But in Starship Troopers, the power armor, first of all, which is so cool.
Yep.
And that's just another part of that that golden age optimism. It's like, oh yeah, we can just build this awesome set of armor, and we'll just launch nukes at everybody, and you'll be fine in the suit, and you're going to drop from the sky, and it's going to be great.
You've hit so many points that were in my notes, but in separate places. I'm going to try. So the weakness of the movie is the failure to incorporate power armor, and it was purely a failure of production capacity. They didn't have the graphics capability to do it. Everything is in camera. It's why the movie looks so great and still stands up, is it's not a bunch of graphics. But they couldn't do the suits, right? So that's one of the letdown. And then for me, the if I had to give
They
a
also hip
critique of.
fire the whole movie, which is just
Oh, it's just because they're
hilarious.
so good, though. They're just so good at shooting. That's how I write that blank check. But
Yeah, fair.
in the book, the letdown is for me that we don't get to see more of the civilian side of things. But I do think Heinlein hints at it really well through Rico's dad and through some of the side commentary about like the union dock workers up in Canada when he goes on his first leave, and some of the other elements that the citizenship side calls the shots in terms of the big picture, but the society itself is overwhelmingly civilians doing what they want within the confines of what the citizens allow and not demand. And I think that's a critical point that takes this away from a dictatorship and turns it into some kind of hybrid authoritarian system.
I think the best way you can say it is it's patriarchal.
Yeah, like to the
And
nth
and
degree.
and not in the way that it's like that a feminist would say that we live in a patriarchy,
Oh
but
no, no,
just
no. The pure definition. Yeah, I agree completely.
that,
It
yeah,
is. It's a realized patriarchy, capital P, like that goes up to the interstellar level.
because women can also be citizens, right?
Totally.
And they have just as much say as any other citizen, right? But it's the burden of responsibility that is foisted upon the citizen that the civilian does not bear,
Yeah,
right? And
and he doesn't
you're
have to. Like
he
it,
doesn't have to.
it's
It's
a benefit of this society is that you don't have to be a citizen.
in fact citizenship is kind of a curse because you are held to a much higher standard in all aspects of life.
And you can lose it at any time. You can give it up if you're weak, if you make a mistake. It's not like it's just guaranteed like the movie says. At any point you can buy the farm or you can quit out or do one of the 31 crash landings or whatever. So yeah, it's a razor's edge you walk as a citizen.
And even afterwards, right? After you've done your service and you're retired and you're just living in society, there's going to how do you interact with because like there's already like a weirdness that American veterans have around, you know, civilians. And I think I mean that honestly goes away in like the first couple months that you're done with your enlistment, more or
Hmm.
less. I mean, at least for me, it was like, oh, okay, I'm kind of back in the world. I'm getting back into my bad habits and whatever. Uh, but imagine that you are foisted with the responsibility of the franchise around people whose primary concerns are their own well-being.
Right.
It's amazing that there's not a lot of class hatred in both directions. And maybe that's the fatal flaw that Heinlein doesn't see in his perfectly logical system because well actually and they even explain that that rebellion is impossible because they select for that. So anybody who would be a rebel would just join the service.
Yeah, and I think I do find that believable. And I think on two fronts, what we just talked about, how they're able to kind of neuter the lions in society. So we do know that systems, whether it's our bureaucratic oligarchy or this fantastical, military authoritarian system, you can set things up societally so that you negate some of the potentials for coup or rebellion, revolution, or breakdown. So I do find that believable. I think the comparison to American military veterans, and I want to word this carefully because I'm not intending to go after anyone specifically, but it's a big lie that the military is that different from the civilian world currently because the way
Hmm.
it's configured. I don't mean
Right.
historically. When you look at the American military in 1914 was behind Greece and ahead of Serbia, or behind Serbia and ahead of Greece, but it was the 13th largest military, and it was mostly at the time the merchant marine. because that they were considered part of the military. It
Right.
was a tiny, tiny military. In that world, I do think there was a very harsh dichotomy between civilian and servicemen. In the world we exist in now, at least for the entirety of the global war on terror, the military has been bending over backwards to say soldiers are just like you. They're normal people. You can be one too. Like, we're all good, normal citizens. Like, there's no difference. And we know that, the cold-blooded, tier 1 guys are different, but they're different in almost a negative way. Like in an icky kind of way. Like, you don't want them in your neighborhood. And it's so funny when people are like, they meet a SEAL for the first time, or a ranger or something, and they basically are like, oh my God, he's so human. Like, it was a shock that this was a human being.
Right.
Because the propaganda is so weird about SEALs in particular. They kind of did it to themselves, we'll be honest. They're the ones that let the cameras in and did all that stuff. But it's unfair to the SEALs too, because they turned into this whipping boy for all of tier 1 or all of SOF or whatever you want to call it. But besides them, and besides like the fighter pilots or the big generals at top, there's been so much effort to make the military be nothing more than civilians that wear camouflage everywhere for no good reason.
I'm
Which is
doing
one of
my part.
Yeah. One of the funnier things about the modern American military is you walk around a city and you see these guys in camouflage that makes them stand out terribly.
It's camouflage that makes you stand out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's this joke, and it's baggy, it's ugly, it's this frumpy look. I mean, it's
And you
almost as
only
silly
wear
as
it to get priority boarding at the airport.
there's that, but there's also a lot of the bases and the federal buildings and stuff. They force those guys to do that. Now, if they were wearing their dress uniforms all the time, I think that would be different. But I think there'd be a lot of officers that would complain about that. And I think that's how that's one of the reasons we've gotten to where we are, is the upper echelon listening to the griping of the lower. And that's something Heinlein gets into about how, I took a note here. I can't find it, but it's so fascinating. Here it is. Okay. Even in a world where the author has created the appearance and explanation of advancement, refinement, and sufficiency across the board, the brass still makes damn fool mistakes, and the fighting of a war must still be relearned in the same way that war had to be relearned between World War I and World War II. I think that's a cultural thing that Heinlein lived through. But it is kind of funny that you go out of your way to make power armor and this amazing military machine that turns young men into citizens and all these things, but still somehow they don't know how to fight wars properly, and they put people in the wrong place. They make mistakes, and he doesn't focus on it. It's definitely a between the lines thing, but you do see that the military bureaucracy does not work that well because it's stretched out over light years, because it's so big, because the TOE is getting holes punched in it all the time through casualties and transfers and whatever. So he tries to put that in there, and it's incongruous with how well he describes how perfectly oiled machine it is. But to circle back to what I was saying, I really wish there was a few more chapters showing us the civilian world, because I think he could have done a lot with that, showing how it's so different than the citizenship. And in some ways, there are people that are like, I'm more disciplined than the military. I'm smarter and stronger. And then other ones where they're pot smoking hippies that don't even care about the bugs, and they like side with them. They like wear fake legs on their jumpsuit
Oh
to like
God, that'd be
empathize with the
funny.
bugs, things like that. And I do think his world, I would never be so presumptuous, but I got to tell you, I've absolutely fantasized about writing stories in Heinlein's Starship Troopers world. It's mostly out of love because I want more. But I do think he created a world that can be extended, that could be turned into a mini series that could be really good if the right people made it. And you could focus on some of these things. And I think it is a rich world. I don't think it's a flat world. It's not perfect. And he's a mid 20th century liberal, and he had these beliefs. I know this was kind of popular a few weeks ago, but the whole thing that like European society just assumes 130 plus IQ white males are making all the decisions. And like, that's how the thing is oriented. And you can argue left, right, center about that. But I do think that a lot of the Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment, if you will, the post-Nietzsche Enlightenment makes a lot of assumptions about who smart people are and what they do and what they're going to do. And I think Heinlein did that. He made assumptions about what would happen when all these smart people with good philosophy that had also done a few tours in World War II came into power, and he was wrong. He
It's
was
very
dead wrong.
much it's very much reminiscent of Camelot and Kennedy and the best and brightest, right? And you have post-war the whiz kids that are running the Defense Department. It's about getting just to borrow a Trumpism, we're going to get the best people and we're going to put them in. They're going to do fabulous, terrific, amazing work.
And he believes it.
Yeah,
his whole generation believes it.
Yeah, and that's and Heinlein believed that too. He believed that you just need to get the right people in charge, and then the system will you. He's very much in love with the system,
Yes.
right? So rather than the system being an IQ shredder, which we kind of know that it is, the system is going to make you, to borrow another army slogan, all that you can be.
Yeah. And it's a sacred belief they have too. That holy system, if given the right material, with the right oversight and the right guidance, will always result in the best possible outcome.
And that might be the fatal flaw of liberalism, is that we just have to keep tweaking the system. And maybe that's the fatal flaw of ideology-based societies, right? Because that was the fatal flaw of communism, right? And well, fascism, it didn't last long enough to know. Like fascism, we can say that its fatal flaw was just terminal war, right? Among a few other things. And again, I'm not an expert, so maybe there will be people out there that say, well, actually this, that, and the other thing. But let's say that the three post-Enlightenment ideologies, their fatal flaw was not realizing that their systems weren't perfect, and that it's constantly, it couldn't be that it's a flaw. It's got to be something that we can be tweaked and fixed. Kind of, and you can see that in the American Constitution, right? We just need another amendment, right? We just need this, that, and the other thing. We just need to expand the franchise to everybody. We need to make everybody equal, right? And then we'll have what we want. I said a lot there.
No, well, I just want to go on the record and say that the fatal flaw of the liberal world order is that it's controlled by demon-worshipping cannibals that hate humans. That's the biggest flaw as I see it.
Besides that.
Yes, outside of that, look, I'm so back and forth on the founding fathers. I've completely taken the mold bug pill. Tory domination now, like get rid of the rebels. Like Washington was wrong. We need to go back. But that's a silly kind of niche belief, and I get that's not a very American thing to say. But the amendment system, I don't need to write. I don't need to advocate for the founding fathers. Their work stands. I do think it was a good faith attempt based on some very large assumptions and some faulty priors. And one thing that gets to me is when people are constantly making the perfect the enemy of the good. And I think that's a lot of what these LWO types, it's never good enough to just be good enough. It's always got to be better. It's never okay that just, the landowners vote. We always need more. The franchise must be extended. The equality must be spread. The blah, blah, blah.
As long as there is one Eskimo that is not learning gay feminist poetry, we cannot stop as a society.
Oh, we have to keep marching, right? Yeah, until every child knows how to do the banana condom thing. And that really highlights the religiosity of progressivism, to take us on yet another tangent. And it's something that Heinlein, you see it in the way that he just assumes there's Muslims and that there's Hindus and that there's Christians and that there's all these people in the army, because that great liberal project was going to make all that stuff secondary to the society itself. And honestly, a big part of me agrees. Or at least I've got the programming to think that's possible, even though I know it's not true. I want it to be true.
Well, I mean, that's the mid-century American. Like anybody can like that's the lie, right?
The dream, yeah, dreams and lies, very similar to each other.
Like, okay, so you have you know turn of well mid 1800s, right? You have a lot of Italians and Irish come over, and then they assimilate and they go back to Europe and they fight in World War II, right? So the plan is, okay, we're going to assimilate, invite the world, assimilate the world, conquer the world, right?
Hmm.
But because assimilation has become this, like, it's become a dirty word, right? At
Exactly,
least
it's a
at least
taboo. It's
you
like
know
the bad
now
thing.
it's okay, invite the world, let them invade.
Yeah, accommodate. It's instead
Yeah,
of assimilate, we accommodate.
right. And it's now we're going to ghettoize and balkanize our society
And maybe that's
just to
the
pay just to
appeal.
pay for just to pay for boomers pensions, by the way. But it's
And that's because only the evil ones are left, because all the good boomers died young of cancer and doing crazy things, and so we're left with the cowards.
the only
And
good boomer is that, nah, never mind, never mind, never mind.
but oh man, you totally blew me off there. Oh man, what was it? Oh, it doesn't even matter. The assimilation part.
Disavow.
Yeah, right. No, 100% avow. You're absolutely right. I love my parents, but the project. So one of the faulty priors was that it didn't matter that it was a patriarchal Christian identified white nation making it all possible. And we don't even have to go deep into the race, this, ethnos, that, whatever. But it's kind of funny to see how brilliant these mid-century sci-fi authors were, and yet they too thought it was magic dirt. We don't know. We can't ask them. And I bet if they saw things now, a lot of them would recant some of this stuff. But based on what we have from them, they truly believe that the magic dirt gets rubbed all over the feet of the migrant, and then you have a bit of a war, and then suddenly everybody's on the same page with the American project.
Yeah, you would just have to kill them in large enough numbers that the ones that survive want to stay and make the society better.
See, if they actually believe that, I do think that there's a utility to that you can, but that's the dirty
Yeah,
concept
if they
of
believe that, we'd be
culture.
fighting Russia right now.
Well, hey, careful what you predict. We know 2024 might be calmer than 2023, but
2024 is the year of the Mexican versus the Russian.
I
I'm
wonder.
calling it now, folks.
Do you think they could? Do you think they would?
No,
I don't know.
I don't.
I think they're gonna if World War III starts, it's gonna be America, because it's gonna be the GAE clawing back it to try to get its empire under control. I think China. That's a hilarious clip of Xi Jinping disappointed at years spent of plot to defeat America, and Joe Biden beats him to the punch or something like that. I think
It was like an Onion article. It was
that
no, it
one,
was
there was the
not Onion.
Taliban. No, it was the Onion. They were like, Taliban unleashes plot to let America destroy itself.
No, well, there was
Uh,
also the Babylon Bee. It's like FBI finds plot of radical right wingers in America sitting by and letting America destroy itself.
it's the same joke, and it's funny each time
Oh,
too,
it's so
because
funny
it's
every
so
time.
appropriate. But when we look at a little bit, I'll go on the record. I'm fine being wrong about everything. I think the heritage Americans, for lack of a better way to say it, the real Americans are going to be the ones that get shipped overseas.
Yeah,
The
yeah. I mean,
migrant soldiers that are coming, they're going to be deployed to the suburbs. They're going to be deployed to make sure that gay space communism is never besmirched in any alley or behind any door. And I think you're going to see that dichotomy of the military. And I genuinely hope I'm wrong here. But one of the funnier terms I heard last year was tranissary. And if you know the history of the Ottoman Empire, the Janissaries are a fascinating, and I don't want to say despicable, it's just a very devious thing to do,
there's
because the
a
Balkan people were a terrible foe to have. And the Ottomans realized a society with a lot of eunuchs and power, I will point out, figured out that if they rip them away from their homes and they force a new language and religion on them, they will end up being far more loyal than anyone that could have come from the empire.
okay. So there's a book by Ivo Andrić, and I'm probably saying that wrong, called "The Bridge on the Drina," that is exactly about that. He was a Yugoslav novelist who talked, and the book is about uh, a kid being taken away from his parents to go become a janissary in the late Ottoman Empire. So I have it on my
Yeah, you got it. Ivo
shelf.
Andrić.
Yep,
Yeah, I got to
Ivo
get that. That looks
Andrić.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's. I mean, I haven't read it yet, but I really like Everyman's Library. So I got that. I got that edition, and it's just staring at me on my shelf.
What was that you just said? Was it Everyman's Library? What
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that?
They're a book publisher, so they publish classics. I think it's a Penguin imprint, but they have these really nice, high quality hardcovers. Uh,
You and I both know there are some amazing things coming out. I'm going to use the term. I'm going to say it. The DR. There's a lot of really cool things happening. The publishing
this is
side of
one of
it.
them.
Oh, 100%. The publishing side of it though is absolutely my favorite part. The pour one out for Mystery Grove, but the return to classic literature. I get the paperbacks because I'm poor, but I dream of my hard copy of Noticing. I look forward to seeing your work in hard copy and all the other ones, and God willing, someday my work in hard copy. I love that we're doing that because I know the internet's amazing and technology is awesome, but if there is any kind of collapse or even a hiccup, we have books from the Roman Empire. We have texts from the Ming Dynasty. We have these things, words on paper, and you have truly made it as a school of thought when you are putting out books. I believe that. Maybe that's childish, but I believe it. And I love seeing these books come out because I can buy them and put them in special containment and save them for later, for my kids, and or for strangers, for perfect strangers to pick up and kind of rebuild identity or culture. And that's how you do it, is trapped in these books. And so I know it's a bit of a tangent, but I've always loved books. But again, I've never been wealthy, so I have lots of paperbacks, but I'm slowly accruing hardbacks from Passage, and I love what they're doing with their stuff, and I love that there's a bunch of people doing it too. It's not just any one person, and I think that's an excellent thing, to get these texts and trap them in ink and paper, and that's part of this is a weaker callback to Heinlein, but when you listen to the book on YouTube. Each chapter heading has a different cover, like the German cover or the Japanese cover or the British or the Canadian. And when you look at the artwork, I don't know why cover artists are so bad. Like it's this mix of bad and good. The skill is all there, but it's like when you look at the power armor, did they just not read it? Like did Heinlein not care? Because it just looks terrible, even though the artistry is amazing.
I
But it's like
think
so disconnected from the text itself.
I think and I'm gonna put this as the image for the pod, but I think that the first edition hardcover of Starship Troopers is perfect. They got these
Which
little like BS parachutes, and the guy in the power armor is falling down. It's simple, it's clean.
I'm gonna look it up now just to see,
Yeah.
because I have my own favorite one, because it was my first copy had a picture from the movie. That's how
Oh, I
late to the
see.
party I am. So,
Right.
but I did eventually get a copy. But you're saying it's the first edition cover?
Yeah. So my cover right now is the because I have a more recent edition. It's from Ace, which I guess is like a paperback science fiction company, but it's just a simple green picture with an arachnid in crosshairs, which I think is pretty effective. But yeah, no, there's an art to good, and I learned this firsthand.
Oh no, I see. You're right.
Working
Beautiful.
with an artist, and then also developing my own cover for my second book. There is a lot that has to go into making a cover for a book, and it's easy to miss the mark.
Yeah, I haven't fought that battle yet myself, and I'm looking forward to it. Of the many things, and some are great, and I'm not trying to blow smoke here, but I very much like the work you've done so far in terms of the cover art. But it baffles me how, especially in sci-fi, like you'll see these terrible renditions, especially when the author goes out of their way to describe everything. It's like it's not even like you only have one line to work with, and that you still come up with this really, really just not correct one. The one I have in love is the capture trooper on the cover holding the gun with the helmet slowly being lowered over his head. And
Yeah.
I
Oh
love
yeah.
that
Yeah.
one because
That's
it, yeah,
yeah. That's the. It reminds me of StarCraft.
yes, very much. And that's a love, definitely a love of mine is the StarCraft
And
world.
and, and and that's the thing too. He invented the Space Marine with
He really
with
did.
this book. So, uh, aliens, right?
Yep.
And actually, funny enough, the Space Marines and aliens, it's their armor that they're wearing in Starship Troopers.
That's awesome. That's so correct. I didn't
Yep.
even think about that. But yeah,
Yep.
it's those panels and the Starship
And the
Troopers
helmets.
gun,
Yep.
the helmets, the whole motif of Starship Troopers the movie is perfect to me. That is what I hope the future Space Marines look like. I know they won't, but I hope they do. And I think it's just because the age I saw it at, it just laid it down so indelibly. But everything about that movie, even the hip firing, even the silliness of the men and women serving in an infantry battalion, which is hilariously wide of the mark in reality. But it's still, I just love the delivery, the gray that the soldiers are wearing, and then of course, the Hugo Boss uniforms of the
Of the
psych warfare.
officers. Yeah.
Yeah, and they nail it. It just nails it. And it's so weird to see a movie be so incorrect and yet still so wonderful
Yeah,
because it's not the book.
the aesthetics are peak in the movie. There's something like, I wish I'd been a ranger just so that I could wear a beret without being gay.
As a kid, I loved the beret. Like growing up, LARPing, like playing as a little kid, I was very into World War II. But then as I kind of got older, started to get into like, machine guns and stuff. But the beret was always so cool to me, and the Air Force destroyed it. Like they just put everybody in the beret, and then it just kind of killed it for me. But I used to think like berets, like you had to like kill 10 people with your
Yeah,
teeth before
you
you could
gotta
get a
earn
beret.
that.
And it still
Yeah.
looks badass. And all it takes is another world war for all of our aesthetic changes, all of our aesthetic preferences to change. But it's funny how the uniform does matter. The clothing does matter. It's not an afterthought. And you can do a ton of psychological heavy lifting very easily. And you can also turn yourself into, I'm terrible at Greek stuff, but like I think Sisyphus is the one that pushes the rock up the hill.
Yes. Yes.
That's where American military aesthetic is right now. And they're so embarrassingly going back to World War II uniforms. Like that's gonna
Yeah,
fix the problem.
but
Like,
even the new camo for for the army, right? It looks
mhm.
miles better than the ACUs or the BDUs.
Is that Marpat? No, ACU is its own thing. Yeah, that was a rough time for everybody. I
Yeah.
mean, even civilians, I think, have struggled a little bit seeing that.
Marpat looks good still. The navy, the blue the blue Marpat that the navy had, or
Mm.
do they still have that? Where you're trying to be camouflaged in the water.
Yeah, right.
Uh,
Because the ship sunk. Like, what is the
eh,
implication there? Like,
and then you get like the Air Forces, or like the weird kind of. It looks like you're wearing a palm tree.
I gotta ask you, how far away are we from rainbow uniforms? Because it would be real easy to digitize, like with the little cubes and the way, like if they go back to ACU, but they do it Roy G. Biv. I'm sorry, I don't mean to hit you where
I
it
would
hurts, but
I
I
would
feel like it might happen.
I would say that it's more likely going to be a dress uniform.
Oh, totally. Like
You
it'll
know,
start with a stripe, like on one
yep,
shoulder, and
yep.
then it'll
You'll
grow like an infection across the pasteboard and everything else.
or like you
It,
can wear a pride flag patch.
yeah. That's what is his face? Roland Emmerich put that in which movie? Roland Emmerich makes kids movies for adults. That's what his movies are.
Oh,
That's how you can
what is it?
understand
The
them.
second Independence Day? That's
I
the last
don't
movie
know.
I saw by
I think it
him.
was before that, but he's got one where an Air Force officer has a rainbow patch on their arm and they walk across the camera. It's so blatant. And then they walk back within a minute later and it's on the other arm too. So either the guy had two or he switched it. And it's just like the idea. It's obviously Roland
Well,
Emmerich
no,
has
that's
no
just
idea how the
that's the
military
unit
works.
he deployed with
Yeah.
as well. But okay, so if anything, we'll see it in Civil War because you'll have trans snipers.
Is that happening? That's a thing?
Well, I mean, well, no, in the movie Civil War that's
No,
coming
that's what I
out.
mean. Is
Yeah,
it
yeah,
a TV show or is it a movie?
I think it's a movie. Um, I want to. I made the joke that I want to sue the director for taking my ideas.
Oh no,
But
I'm in the same boat. Mine was different, but yeah, no, a lot of us had our hearts broken when that trailer dropped. I couldn't get more than 5 seconds into it.
But yeah, no, in the trailer, there's a sniper in a ghillie suit, and their nails are painted the trans flag colors.
Of course there is.
Right.
Because of course that's how it's gonna go.
Right, and then you've got Meth Damon, the actor, who's wearing rose-colored glasses and has blood on his hands and is asking, "What kind of American are you?"
I know that part because there's been some very wonderful memery that's come out of it, and I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, my friend the Prudentialist did make a good point about that, though. He's like, you people are making memes like Douglas Mackey didn't get arrested.
That's a very good point, but by that same token,
It's
this
really
last
funny.
year though, it has been insane to me to see things that just a few short years ago we were arguing if it would be 1 generation or 2 generations before anyone would even be able to discuss it.
Yeah.
And now you've got people, Bud Light drinkers talking about things that were very much dark enlightenment not that many years ago.
I mean, you've got Vivek Ramaswamy talking about the Great Replacement, but kind of unironically, because I mean, I won't finish that thought. But
well, I know. I mean, a guy participating in it is talking about it, which is fascinating. And
right.
but it's out there though, and that's another aspect of all this too, is that they just.
He's like, my fellow high-caste guys.
Every time he says "our," like when he talks about the founding fathers or the history, it's so clear he doesn't believe it, and I don't know how I'm supposed to believe that he means it, because he like puts this weird emphasis on it, and it's just it's just clown world, dude. That's where we are at now. We should always just expect the craziest, most illogical thing to happen, because we've just crossed out of the boundary of what could be expected. And
Tucker 2024.
I'm fine with that.
You heard it here.
If you end up wanting to cut out any of this, you're not going to hurt my feelings at all.
No, not at all. No, I got to put it all out there.
I'm fine with that too. But I know we strayed. I did want to bring up and give you my apologies. I saw they did that heinous horror show at the World War II monument. It was just unbelievable to me that they would do that. Where they just awarded Space Force. So Space Force just inducted some transsexuals into high command or something, and they decided to do the ceremony at the World War II monument.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, it's literally like they're like, okay, what can we do next to incur Sodom and Gomorrah? Like that's what they're not even like beating around the bush. They're like, the goal is fire and brimstone. How can we go about it? And just seeing those pictures, it's just so, it's campy. There's nothing about it that has decorum. There's nothing about it that says warrior or strength. It's literally like, none of this is real. And so we're just going to do whatever we want. And it's so opposite of whatever Heinlein put in. It's like if you went through the Starship Troopers and it's like, what are the requirements for a successful military? Okay, let's do the opposite of that. And that's where we're at. And that's terrifying because I don't think it's going to be bugs. But I do think it's going to be an invasion.
Bugmen.
Yeah, like wherever they come from, whoever they are, like we are fast approaching that point. But I guess we will find out. To answer your earlier question, have they bred out all the lions or not?
I want to say they haven't, right? And it's kind of cringy to be like, well, I know all these guys on the dissident right, and they're the future lions, and I don't know if that, like, maybe 1, maybe 2. Like there's definitely no Alexander the Great in our midst, I'd say. I'm certainly not one. I'm a writer, and I'm
and if he is though, if he is, he's 5 or 6. Maybe he's 13. Maybe he hasn't found himself. And that, to me, that's the black pill with the white lining, is that we are probably not going to get the opportunity to absolve ourselves of what we've tacitly been involved in over these last 10 years. Right. We're probably going to have to carry that the same way a lot of good boomers just have to put up with what we say about that generation, even though they did everything right, because they were the minority and they didn't win, like cultural war wise. So we're probably going to be in that category. If we survive, our children and our children's children will probably not look very fondly on us as a group. but it's going to be us that instills that ability to see that it's not the way to do it. And I know that's a thankless job, and I'm finding that as a parent, there's a lot of thankless jobs, but that's one that I take on gladly, is to teach my children to not take it sitting down, to not follow along with this, to not just be part of it, to be something more and something better. And those are high-minded words, and I'm very early on in the human project. But I'm not alone either. I say this to you honestly, because I do know lots of people who are raising their children, and we are scattered now, but we are slowly accreting together. And, it doesn't have to be all depressing. There are lions in the woods, and all it takes is for the lights to get shut out, and then the lions will come out. They will come out, and it might not be as much fun as we're portraying it.
No, it's not going to be fun at all. It's going to get really bad. At least in my estimation. I mean, I wrote a whole book about how bad I think it's going to be.
Yeah, and I think anyway you
to
slice
plug
it's gonna be bad.
myself, which is, but to bring it back to Starship Troopers,
Yeah,
for a second, because I feel like we've covered everything under the sun except this book, which you should go out and read.
We've gotten some good things in here. I feel like we've piqued interest in this. And if we haven't, we should re-record the whole thing because it's one of the best books ever.
Yes, and this is the book for the young man who wants desperately to be part of something greater than himself.
Yes.
Especially the young man who wants to have adventure, who wants to have camaraderie on a level deeper than I have a fantasy football league. There's something kind of cringy about the modern military. Everybody is your brother kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Like,
it's ridiculous.
Even and I'm sure, and I might get some flack for this, but even like the wars that America just lost, right? There was, you read something like Band of Brothers, right, where the unit stayed together the entire time for the duration of the war, and these men knew each other intimately. Even the replacements had to find their way into this company of soldiers, right? And this was true for the entire Allied military structure, right? You might do a pump with a Ranger battalion, right, and then cycle out of the army entirely, right? Or, I mean, I know higher enlisted guys who went an entire career without, and I was, I enlisted right after Iraq ended, and just as Afghanistan was sort of slowing down, right? And like, they had the surge in Afghanistan, but it was, that didn't last super long, and then Afghanistan sort of just became the like page 5 news to everybody who wasn't in, right? So I know higher enlisted guys that enlisted before 9/11 who had never done a deployment, and you can tell just from their uniform, like, what they wear in their dress uniform, that they never had a deployment ribbon or any medals outside of what they get for what is compulsory, right, just by being in long enough. So I don't know. I've made my best friends from the military, but I don't go around calling everybody my brother, because that's just not the experience.
And we went into that earlier, though. They've made that impossible, and even to the point of pushing the guys who, like, whether it's the Ranger battalion or the guys that do get an opportunity to serve duration like that, they still structure it in a way that tries to turn it into an office job, like punch your clock, time to go be a hero. Oh, 5 o'clock, no more hero stuff. It's beer o'clock. And Yeah, but I think it's
It's
very
Miller
intentional.
time.
Miller. Is that does the military have a beer? Does like the Army have their own beer? The Marine Corps have their own beer?
I don't know. I
See,
mean,
that alone tells you something's wrong. Like that should be like it should be known. It should be like, oh, the Marines drink O'Doul's, like jokingly, because they're like dumping vodka directly into the bottle, like and just saying it's O'Doul's. But there's a lot of things, and it is culture too. And I wonder if this book's going to have a renaissance in popularity. I think it should. I think it deserves it.
I don't think it will. I think that they're so focused on not this.
When you say they, can you clarify? You mean just the
The powers that be, right? The blood sucking cannibals that run our government.
So let me throw a hypothetical at you. Say you have a man who's a parent and he's got sons, and he wants his sons to have a piece of this, whatever is in this book. But he's in this environment that we find ourselves in, where the last thing you would do is send your sons off to die for gay space communism. Is there some other aspect of society where this is attainable, or is what Heinlein is what he's portraying here only found in the trenches in uniform?
My snarky answer is the Girl Scouts.
That's hilarious. Like, do I have to dress them up as girls or
no? But I'm just because the Boy Scouts are dead, right? Yep. And
it's not restricted to the military. Anything with brotherhood or honor has been annihilated.
I mean, the close maybe like a high school or college sport.
But that's terminal. You can't be, mid-20s in a high school football team. So I was thinking forest firefighting.
Yeah. Firefighting, police.
See, somewhat, no, those have been destroyed too. I don't know how much you know about the world of law enforcement.
I know very little.
So everything that you've talked about, that you've seen in terms of military, they demoed it in law enforcement in the 90s. Because law enforcement used to be it was a much smaller and more localized thing. It is a modern affectation of LEO to see everybody wearing the same stuff and wearing the tack gear or wearing whatever. You get tastes of what law enforcement used to be like with state police a lot of the times because they wear the wide brim hats and the uniforms, and you can find it in southern towns or in small places in the
Barney
Midwest.
Fife's not walking around anymore.
He's just there's only like 10 of them.
Yeah,
and they're in little towns. Yeah. But my point being is that that's not an option. Law enforcement is not an option. Firefighting is not an option. It's been turned. That's why I said forest firefighting specifically, because you have to learn a skill set, and then you either jump in a truck and drive into hell, or you jump out of a plane as a smoke jumper, and you get into a battalion that are all volunteer companies, and it's got a lot of the elements of it. And because it's putting out fires in the middle of nowhere, the powers that be seem to have left it alone a little bit. Obviously, DEI is creeping in everywhere, but they are finding that, rotund women of lesbian proclivity are not the best at jumping out of planes and marching through the woods at
I
20 miles at a stretch.
I think that the answer is revealing itself right now in commercial shipping. There's soon going to be a need for an actual Navy. Right.
Yeah, and then in the private side too, these companies are going to start doing it for themselves.
And that's what I mean, is that these private companies are going to need to select for certain skills that the modern military has absconded with, right? I mean, I know guys who were in SOF who are even saying that SOF has gotten soft.
Yeah, I mean, look at the Eddie Gallagher case. It's everywhere. There's no one safe from what's happening.
So yeah, right now, nothing, but maybe soon, you might get to go fight pirates in the around the Horn of Africa or through the Strait of the Suez Canal, rather.
Yeah, or the Mississippi River. I mean, that is one thing too, that it's the South Africanization is not going to be restricted to South Africa. And
No.
so, you know, there is that angle, but then it doesn't, it's just it's a imperfect solution in my opinion, because firms like Triple Canopy, I don't know if you know who they are, but everyone knows Blackwater, but there are lots of these groups, and you would be so blown away by how many of them use foreign battalions. They get guys who have done a tour in like the Chilean army or the Bolivian army, and they pay them a lot, and then they deploy them over. This was back during the Iraq portion of the global war on terror, but they do that too. And Blackwater was very unique, and there's a reason the State Department crushed Blackwater and turned it into a skin suit of what it was, because it terrified them. You know, but I wonder, and I do think it's something. I hope you put some thought cycles into it. I know you've got that creative perspective that's going to bring something unique, but I hope anyone listening does the same thing. And you know, they took the Boy Scouts from us, they took the military from us, they're taking our history and our culture from us. We are going to have to find replacements. And I maybe this is excessively optimistic. I do think Starship Troopers is going to have a resurgence. I think there's going to be a renaissance of this book and a few other ones, because there's nothing cooler than a Space Marine wrecking shop on space spiders. Like, that is awesome. It's awesome to anyone who likes playing Nerf guns or steps on spiders. So again, I'll accept that it's excessively optimistic, but I do think it's going to come back.
I think I'm going to let you have the last word there.
All right, man.
Tom, where can people find you? How can people support you? Anything else that you want to just shill? Please let the good people know.
Well, I spend too much time on Twitter saying mean things, so I always jump in and tell me I'm wrong or correct my grammar or whatever. I write for free on Substack, and I enjoy it very much. I just wish more people would argue with me and counter and push back. So anyone, please, open invitation, come tell me where I'm wrong. And God willing, in the next few months, I hopefully will have some things to offer for people, for people's literary enjoyment. That's what I've been working on lately, and I'm currently working. I don't want to shill a company name, or maybe I should. I've just been working on a few things, and if you jump on the Substack and follow, I will put it up there when everything is ready to go to market. And I'm going to take this time and shill the fair host here, and scores of other men putting out excellent books. It's worth it to buy them. It helps everybody to buy them. We should all be buying each other's books, even if we don't read them. We should buy them and put them on the shelf, because we will get around to them, and that does help. It does make us more viable. And so I would encourage everyone out there, just buy the book. Like, you know, skip a meal, buy a book.
Well, I appreciate that. And if you like this show and you want to support the Double Dealer, we just released our third issue, issue 11 of the Double Dealer. It's got a great cover. It's been getting rave reviews. It's so far our best-selling, quickest-selling issue. If you've already bought the Double Dealer and you want to support this show even more, you can subscribe to us on our Substack. You can give us $8 a month to help us produce this kind of content and have interesting guests like Tom, like Lomez, like Zero HP Lovecraft, who's coming on the show soon. It would really help me out, and I'd appreciate it, and I'd call you my friend. Even if you don't, you're probably my friend out there. So for the Double Dealer magazine, I'm TR Hudson. Thank you very much.